You've probably heard of Hindutva, but what about Jatitva? Well, the thing is, I made it up. Jatitva is something you know once you see it. So, Jitni, Abadi, Utna, that's Jatitva. Asking to redistribute wealth based on caste, that's Jatitva. Two castes in a random village in the middle of nowhere threatening to attack each other over some random statue, that's Jatitva. When Dalits are barred from drinking water and barred from temples, that's Jatitva. Ambedkarites blaming everything on Brahmins and Manyas, well, that's Jatitva too. Jatitva is the idea that one's caste is more important than any other identity, and that it's not only paramount to preserve it, but also weaponize it against more cosmopolitan identities such as class, the Indian identity, and even the identity of being Hindu. Or, as noted by the renowned sociologists, the Wu-Tang Clan. Jatitva is cream. Caste rules everything around me. Being born in America, I didn't really know about my parents' caste till around my 20s. And even then, it didn't really affect my life or my practice as a Hindu. Even to this day, I don't really care for or identify with my caste. But it's a totally different thing in India. Why is it so important to Indians? Well, caste serves multiple functions. Caste is a community, a sense of belonging when the times get tough. When the riots hit, it is your caste kin who will take and throw punches for you. It gives you your rituals, your traditions, your ways of worship, and so much more. Caste is a polity. When election time comes, the candidate from your caste ensures your castemen will occupy government positions, be forgiven of crimes, and have a seat at the round table of power. Perhaps even the throne itself. Caste is an economy. It can be a financial safety net, a business network, or a source of credit and capital. It can be the cornering of a market or government seats. Caste is all-encompassing, as real and essential as air and water for so many Indians. Caste in function is an ethnic group. Now this is really important when it comes to Jatitva. This is why caste is the building block of not just India, but also the institution of its democracy. This means there is a horizontal element of caste beyond the classic vertical oppression pyramid that you'll see in textbooks or nowadays in Equality Lab's professional grifting workshop. This isn't to discount the vertical oppression in caste that we do see, just like we see in other ethnic groups. Certain castes have more resources such as land, labor, capital, and even status. This is where you get the stereotypical bouts of caste discrimination, such as violence towards lower castes, banning certain castes from certain temples, and feudal exploitation, especially in areas such as agriculture. However, these trends are luckily on the downturn, especially as India urbanizes, modernizes, and educates itself. Ideologies such as Hindutva, Ambedkarism, and liberalism all push back against caste discrimination and focus to varying degrees on ideas such as unity, equality, and brotherhood. Now, this is all occurring while the idea of caste is also preserved. So as we said prior, while vertical caste discrimination is lessening, horizontal caste conflict is still present as we see a more even, or perhaps even switched playing field now. B.R. Ambedkar chillingly alludes to this phenomenon of separation and manic competition, saying, "Indeed, the ideal Hindu must be like a rat, living in his own hole, refusing to have any contact with others. There is an utter lack among the Hindus of what the sociologists call consciousness of kind. There is no Hindu consciousness of kind. In every Hindu, the consciousness that exists is a consciousness of his caste. That is the reason why Hindus cannot be said to form a society or a nation." Now, whether you agree or not with Ambedkar about the idea of Hindu consciousness, I think he definitely has a point when it comes to this rat hole mentality that we see amongst different castes. Now, casteism is a big part of Jatitva, in fact, one of the biggest parts, but it does not really include the entirety of it. Jatitva has a strong political element to it, as well as a macro social perspective, not just the microaggressions of caste discrimination. In a democracy, voting frequently takes place along ethnic or social identity lines, especially in poor countries. This means that the social reality of caste is inflamed when the burning hot oil of politics is poured all over it. In this way, democracy actually heightens caste as a political identity, a very unfamiliar idea when we think of India historically. Now, everyone says they want to annihilate caste until election season comes, which in India means every few months. Caste is a useful weapon, a tool of division and dominance. It animates Indians, especially Hindus, in a way few other identities can. Much of this is not just nurtured in the Indian outback, where community ties are understandably strong, but instead a large source of caste divisions is sown in the mills of Indian bureaucracy and governance. Caste today is as much political engineering as it is a people's evolution. part of the roots of Jatitva actually come from the British Raj. Now, this isn't a segment of me blaming the British for every single problem in India. I think there's plenty of blame to go around for Indian politicians or society or whatever, but look, I'm not here to play the blame game. But I do think that the British are a bit guilty in inflaming caste conflict within India. This isn't to say the British invented caste either, so don't get it twisted. But during the British Raj, caste was bureaucratized and linked explicitly to state policies, something which never really happened before in India to such a degree. The British counted and categorized caste, linking their identities to policies in classic divide and rule fashion. Certain castes were disenfranchised and their rights given to others. Some castes were barred from carrying weapons, while others were armed to the teeth due to their loyalty to the British. Other castes were punished and criminalized outright, sometimes due to their profession or the hard time that they gave to the British, such as the Thuggy cult or certain castes engaged in banditry. Ajay Verghese, author of The Colonial Origins of Ethnic Violence in India, has done an in-depth study showing how the British incited caste conflict compared to the princely states in India. Even today, there are examples where caste conflict remains higher in British-ruled localities versus princely state localities, even when they're right next to each other. The Indian Republic inherited and continued some of this differential legal treatment based on caste. This is super important when we talk about Jatitva, because now societal identities become concrete political policies. Your status as a citizen and your interaction with the government now changes simply based on a birth identity of yours. But how does Jatitva actually look in politics? One can point to various caste-based parties or reservations or even caste politics, but I'd say these are mostly mainstays in Indian politics, ever since the beginning actually. I think what Jatitva is when these ideas are taken to the extreme, such as when caste-based parties essentially become mafioso organizations running the government. You see this especially in Bihar across parties and the Samajwadi Party in UP. Or when reservations are notched to massive amounts past 50%, something already present in certain states, but now even the 50% limit is being called to be broken nationwide. Or when welfare is explicitly linked to caste, so only certain castes can avail of these certain benefits. Imagine if affirmative action was 69% in America, or if only Cuban and Vietnamese Americans were eligible for extra food stamps, or if there was a law where a Jamaican American could send you to jail simply because you said something racist to them. Well, these are real things in India, and these things cause a lot of conflict when it comes to politics and society. This has a profoundly corrosive effect on Indian development and democracy. Energy and capital that can be put into infrastructure, giving welfare to all poor people, helping people start businesses, public works, defense, health, education, I mean, you can name it. Honestly, everything and anything is instead thrown into the abyss of caste pride and politics and interests. When caste conflict erupts, a Hindu ceases to be a Hindu, rather falling into the rat holes of caste. The Hindu becomes a Reddy, a Rajput, a Roar, a Ramnami, etc., tossing away religious brotherhood into the fray of fratricide. And it isn't just riots that stoke this sentiment. Simple elections do the trick just fine. A zero-sum mentality develops, meaning every government policy is either an affront or an aid to one's caste. If it helps the other guy, it hurts me. Indians don't cast their vote, they vote their caste. But nowadays it's going even further. Rahul Gandhi and the India opposition are calling for Jitni Abadi Utna Hak. Excuse my Hindi, I know it has a bit of an accent, but. Or however so much one's population is how much power they should have. So if a caste is 20% of the population, it should get 20% of the political posts, 20% of the wealth, 20% of the assistant manager to regional manager positions in the country, 20% of actors, 20% of the army, 20% of the judiciary, 20% of rickshaw drivers. I think you kind of get the point. 20% of everything. It's not just 20%, it can be other numbers too. Now in a way, this kind of sounds fair, right? Like in kindergarten, it would probably be fair, sharing stuff like this. Everyone gets their own share. That's good, right? But that's not how societies and institutions work. Most situations in life don't express themselves having 20% of the population getting 20% of something in demand. On dating apps, 20% of the guys usually get 80% of the girls. The other 80% of the guys are left fighting for, 20% of the girls. Wealth is famously unevenly distributed. Most internet traffic goes through Google, Amazon, Facebook, probably Pornhub, and a few other domains, not all domains equally. Noted mathematician and intellectual Nassim Taleb calls this phenomenon extremistan, where data follows power or Pareto laws. And it's here we see examples like Mukesh Ambani when it comes to wealth, or Pete Davidson when it comes to women. Wealth, politics, and institutional bodies, they all usually follow the mode of extremistan. Things like reservation and progressive taxation, these are checks on these extremities, but are usually done within limit. But what happens if we actually follow through with Jitni Abadi Utna Haq, where each caste would be allotted resources, political power, and other things based on their population? Well, we actually have a live example of this. Lebanon. Lebanon is a very diverse country with multiple regions and sects. In function, different ethnicities. To preserve stability, the Lebanese government opted for confessionalism, a complex set of sectarian representations sharing power between communities based on population. I'll explain in layman's terms. For example, the president is assigned as a Maronite Christian, the prime minister is Sunni Muslim, the speaker of parliament is Shia Muslim, etc., etc. Sectarian quotas in parliament are based on religious community populations. Confessionalism further extends to many other sectors of the government and even laws for marriage, inheritance, etc. This system has resulted in political paralysis and eventual economic malaise as the government just cannot function up to par. In addition, the demographic aspect of quotas means a vicious competition for resources and zero-sum thinking. So much so that Sunni Muslims encourage Sunni Palestinians to settle in Lebanon to tip the balance in their favor. Lebanon would experience a civil war from 1975 to 1990. Some Christian groups would ally with Israel, while others would seek the import of Palestinian Christians, just to get that right population balance, and thereby representation. Overall, the system has led to a decaying of Lebanon's potential, with its capital once known as the Paris of the Middle East, and Lebanon itself being a shining example of modernity in the Middle East. Today, there are calls for the disassembly of confessionalism, as the experiment has gone on long and violently enough. This is Jitni Abadi Utna Haq at its end, consigning India to a permanent caste war with each group at each other's necks. The opposition wants this as India's destiny. Everything proportional. No room for market dynamics, excellence, or innovation. Rather, a morass of stagnancy and rotting crabs in a bucket. It also means total marginalization of micro-minorities, such as Jains, Sikhs, and Buddhists, as well as Brahmins, Baniyas, and other small market-dominant minorities or caste groups, as larger groups crush them with impunity. A death of not just individual merit and efficiency, but also of India's imminent rise as a world power. Jitni Abadi Utna Haq will be the Lebanonization of India and the death of the Indian dream. Yet Jatitva goes much deeper than just politics and economics. Organic Jatitva, or caste politics dialed up to 11, is in a way a ground-up phenomenon. What happens when it's top down? Enter critical caste theory. Now, critical caste theory deserves its own video, which I'll eventually do, but in the meanwhile, you could read my article on it in the description below. But basically, critical caste theory provides academic and elite justification for breaking India apart on caste lines, retributive violence between castes, as well as redistribution of wealth. More or less dressing up the gundas we were talking about prior in a suit and tie and give them an Oxford accent. In a recent video, Rahul Gandhi has said that Dalits fail IIT exams because the exams are made by upper castes and linked it to racial politics in America.
जैसे हमारी IITs होती हैं, उनका जो टॉप एग्जाम होता है उसको SAT कहते हैं। और जब SAT पहले लागू हुआ तो एक अजीब सी चीज आई कि जो अमेरिका में गोरे थे वो सब टॉप कर रहे थे और जो काले चमड़ी वाले थे वो इतना अच्छा नहीं कर रहे थे और वो जो स्पेनिश बोलते हैं वो भी इतना अच्छा नहीं कर रहे थे। तो पहले क्या बोला, पहले जो उनके बड़े बड़े एकेडमिक्स थे उन्होंने बोला देखो ये जो है ना, ये जो काले हैं और ये जो स्पेनिश बोलने वाले लैटिन अमेरिकन हैं ये इतने मेरिटोरियस नहीं है, इनको मतलब वो बात समझ नहीं आ रही है, इनकी कैपेबिलिटी कम है। और ये काफी सालों चला। फिर एक आदमी ने क्या किया, एक प्रोफेसर ने, उसने कहा एक चीज चेक करता हूँ, जो पेपर लिखे गए थे ना उन्होंने वो पेपर कालों से लिखवा दिए। सिर्फ उन्होंने कहा कि ऐसे करते हैं, पेपर कालों से लिखवा देते हैं और फिर वही एग्जाम दे देते हैं। पता क्या हुआ, गोरे सब फेल हो गए। मतलब जो सिस्टम को कंट्रोल कर रहा है वो ही मेरिट डिसाइड कर रहा है। अब मान लो आप किसान के बेटे हो और मैं मतलब किसी बड़े ब्यूरोक्रेट का बेटा हूं, अगर आप एग्जाम लिखोगे मैं फेल होऊंगा ही होऊंगा, और अगर मैं एग्जाम लिखूंगा तो आप फेल होगे ही होगे। तो ये कहना कि भैया ये मेरिट से आया, ये मेरिट से नहीं, सवाल में है भैया वो जो ऊपर बैठा है वो कौन है, वो पहले मुझे बताओ। अब अगर आप मुझे कह रहे हो कि IIT का जो एग्जाम लिख रहे हैं वो सारे के सारे अपर कास्ट के हैं और दलित फेल हो रहे हैं, तो फिर एक काम करो, दलितों से लिखवा के दिखाओ, ट्राई करते हैं।
This is example A of critical caste theory as well as Jatitva. This type of rhetoric is setting the stage not for just a Lebanon, but a Rwanda-like situation where caste/ethnic hatred between groups becomes so big and so ingrained, we start seeing bouts of violence within India. A core idea of Jatitva is to separate SCs, STs, and OBCs from the idea of India itself. This is done by framing all Indian institutions, traditions, and culture as inherently anti-SC, ST, and OBC. India itself, like these institutions, is also framed as an upper caste conspiracy. These institutions and traditions must be destroyed, and that must be done by the Vanguard Party, or the INC, which will lead this social justice movement so the INC can redistribute and reculture India into something anew. Social justice becomes community vengeance. Ages ago, Ambedkar called for the annihilation of caste, but today many Ambedkarites are preserving the institution of caste, using it as a tool for this community revenge. Caste is a powerful weapon when you consider the oppressor-oppressed framework currently dominating most of elite academia and institutions. In academia, and therefore elite media, and therefore even algorithm nowadays, we are seeing caste being used to attack the idea of India itself, as well as the idea of Hinduism. For adherents of Jatitva, it is not caste that should be annihilated. Rather, they seek the annihilation of Hinduism as we understand it today. A common tactic of Jatitva is appropriating widespread Hindu beliefs as a property of a single caste or region. In Punjab and Haryana, it posits Jatera, or ancestor worship, as the original religion of Jats. In Jharkhand, it frames tree worship as the only way of the Sarnas. In Tamil Nadu, it joins Dravidians, claiming Murugan and Shiva as non-Brahminical Tamil, not Hindu deities. Saints and heroes like Tukaram and Shivaji, who forever had the names of Vithala, Mahadev, and Bhavani on their lips, are cast as Bahujan instead of Hindu heroes. All of these are integral and ancient pieces of Hinduism, common across India. Yet Jatitva must promote these falsehoods to fracture Hinduism. In many ways, caste is becoming antagonistic rather than a supplemental force towards Hinduism. This isn't organic, of course, as no historical movements mimic these separatisms. These agitations are engineered. Jatitva is used to influence other castes as well, not just SCs, STs, and OBCs. One funny thing you'll notice on social media is that all the casteist accounts really hate the BJP and Hindutva. Every single one has the same complaint. The BJP is being unfair to our caste and favoring that caste. Hindu unity screws over our caste and it favors that other caste. Many of them flock to either regional parties or, curiously enough, the INC, as they think the INC will give them justice to their caste and screw over that caste, and just so they could teach a lesson to the BJP. Now the logic here is kind of weird, especially considering the cause of Jitni, Abadi, Utna screw over a lot of upper castes in India. But then again, logic isn't really the forte of people obsessed with caste. Jatitva gives a sense of nihilism as well as extreme parochialism, where everything done outside of the rat hole of one's own caste is an affront to their caste. Everything is a conspiracy against them. Jatitva prevents Hinduism as the ruse of ruin, Hindutva as a political conspiracy, and the Indian state as an economic oppressor. What this means is a total alienation and retreat into the rat hole mentality that Ambedkar mentioned earlier. Jatitva can be very effective in breaking Hindutva, as if every caste has a section that feels alienated, well, that means a lot less people voting for the BJP and Hindutva. It also means even if the BJP get into power, they have to start adjusting to caste mongering and redistribution instead of focusing on Hindutva and development. Forget Hindutva and even Hinduism, Jatitva is being used in coordination with regionalism to tear apart the idea of the Indian Union and Indian civilizational unity. Dilip Jarian, a spokesperson for the INC, explains this idea of an accidental or disunited India.
Do you think this government has come the closest to having that ground connect?
I think not. In fact, I think that they are pushing for a much greater level of homogeneity, which I think is dangerous for this country, because that's not who we are. We are essentially just a momentary coalition of unfriendly tribes put together under one flag, and we need to recognize that.
The now resigned INC spokesperson and fan favorite of BJP voters, Sam Pitroda, supplements this idea by proposing Indians as different races, a comment that drew massive backlash from even other INC members. Under the guise of progressivism and internationalism, the most liberal of Indian ideologues team up with the most regressive, parochial, caste-obsessed Indians to enact Jatitva. Across my sojourn on a briefly popular application called Clubhouse, those who oppose India and Hindutva, whether Islamists, Ambedkarites, various ethnic chauvinists, or even supporters of the opposition, though there's not much daylight from the aforementioned, to be honest, all agreed on one strategy: heightened caste tensions to break the united Hindu vote and rising Hindu consciousness. Parochialism was a toxin of choice to spread across the neurons of the Indian mind. Jatitva is the culmination of years of backroom election strategizing, now capitalizing and accentuating fault lines within Hinduism. This is what it really comes down to, a battle between Hindutva and Jatitva, forces that want a centripetal or uniting vision of the Indian Union and Indian civilization against Indians that want to keep Indians, or maybe South Asians, in that rat hole mentality we discussed earlier, a confederacy of South Asian states and castes. And this is indeed what the 2024 and probably 2029 elections are going to be centered around. Will Indians choose unity and development, or segregation and redistribution? Thanks everyone for listening to this. I know we did a bit more advanced topic than usual, but like I told you guys before, I've been writing about India for 5 years. So I'm going to keep doing these types of, a bit more complex topics, and they're some of my favorite actually. But anyways, thank you for watching. Like, share, comment, subscribe. I think I covered all of it. Thanks again. This is Akshar from the Emissary. Have a good one.